Hiram Hank Williams was born into a world of poverty, instability, and constant motion. Yet from those fractured beginnings emerged one of the most emotionally raw and lyrically rich voices to ever echo through the hills of Alabama and across the American airwaves. A man whose life was as brief as it was meteoric, Williams reshaped country music in the 20th century through pain-hardened poetry, heartfelt melodies, and a voice that trembled with lived experience. His was a life carved in sharp relief, passion tangled with suffering, success shadowed by loss, and adoration eclipsed by torment. Hank Williams did not live long, but while he burned, he illuminated a path no one had walked before him. Born on September 17, 1923, in Mount Olive, Alabama, Hank was the third child of Alonzo and Jessie Lilybell "Lily" Williams. Alonzo, a World War I veteran, struggled with health issues, and, by the time Hank was 7, his father had been hospitalized in a veterans facility, leaving Lily to raise the children alone. The family lived in poverty, frequently moving across southern towns, seeking security that never quite arrived. From a young age, Hank suffered from a spinal condition, spina bifida occulta, which left him in chronic pain. Though rarely spoken of, this physical torment would shadow him through his entire life. His early years were a mix of upheaval and resilience. While other boys ran across fields, Hank turned inward, nursing his pain and channeling it into music. Lily worked multiple jobs to support the family and became Hank's fiercest advocate. It was she who bought him his first guitar, and she who drove him to his early performances in small-town gatherings, church socials, and talent shows. Music came to Hank not through classrooms or conservatories, but through porch steps, street corners, and backwoods revivals. He listened obsessively to the Grand Ole Opry and the blues musicians that roamed the Deep South. His greatest early influence was a Blackstreet performer named Rufus T-Tot Payne, who taught Hank guitar techniques and vocal phrasing in exchange for meals or loose change. The blend of country twang and southern blues fused into something wholly unique. Hank absorbed everything: old-time ballads, gospel spirituals, hillbilly storytelling, and roadhouse sorrow songs. He would later credit Payne with teaching him how to make music weep. By the time he was in his early teens, Hank was forming bands and performing live. He dropped out of school, focusing entirely on music, appearing on WSFA radio in Montgomery under the name The Singing Kid, and, later, leading his own group, the Drifting Cowboys. Their early tours were gritty affairs, sleeping in cars, scraping together change for meals, and hustling for bookings in honky-tonks and VFW halls. In 1943, Hank married Audrey Shepard, a relationship that would swing between adoration and volatility. Audrey was ambitious, forceful, and often tried to insert herself into Hank's music, insisting on singing, despite limited talent. Their bond was passionate and combustible, riddled with arguments, reconciliations, and separations. Though their marriage would eventually collapse, it was during this time that Hank's writing deepened. His heartbreak and frustrations bled into lyrics, infusing his songs with layers of emotional ache that listeners could not ignore. Hits like "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry" and "Cold, Cold Heart" did not merely entertain. They bared wounds. His son, Randall Hank Williams, later known as Hank Williams, Jr., was born in 1949. Hank was rarely a stable father, but he remained emotionally tied to the boy. He often penned lullabies and wrote letters that revealed his yearning to be more present. His guilt would manifest in songs filled with regret and longing. Hank's breakthrough came in 1946 when he signed a publishing deal with Acuff Rose, and soon after, a contract with MGM Records. In 1947, his first single, "Move It On Over," caught fire, and by 1949, Lovesick Blues catapulted him to stardom. His performances at the Grand Ole Opry cemented his reputation as a rising star. He took the stage at Ryman Auditorium and received 6 encores on his debut night, an unprecedented response. Soon came a streak of hits that defined post-war American country music. Your Cheatin' Heart, Hey Good Lookin', You Win Again, and I Saw the Light carried a voice full of bruises and sincerity. They were stripped down, yet rich with meaning, delivered by a man who seemed to live every word. But the pressure of touring, drinking, and physical agony gnawed at him. Hank battled alcoholism fiercely. He was often late to shows, sometimes too intoxicated to perform, and increasingly unreliable, even as his records sold by the truckload. By the early 1950s, his Opry contract was canceled. His behavior had become impossible to manage. He turned instead to the Louisiana hayride, a looser and more forgiving circuit, but the damage to his health and reputation had begun to take its toll. During his darkest periods, Hank released records under a pseudonym, Luke the Drifter. These spoken-word recitations, filled with moral tales and reflections on human frailty, allowed him to explore themes that didn't fit the mold of mainstream country radio. Tracks like Men with Broken Hearts and Be Careful of Stones That You Throw were philosophical, heavy, and deeply personal. Through Luke, Hank channeled his despair, his spiritual anxieties, and his disillusionment with the world. These were not party anthems, they were parables, often bleak and brimming with introspection. Though they didn't sell as widely as his hits, they became cult favorites and revealed an artist in deep conflict with himself. By 1952, Hank's body was failing. Years of physical pain, substance abuse, and erratic living had hollowed him out. His marriage to Audrey collapsed entirely, and his behavior became increasingly erratic. He was fired, rehired, and fired again by various promoters. Despite this chaos, he continued to record. Songs like I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive carried an eerie prescience. He seemed to sense the closing of the curtain and often joked morbidly about his own end. In the summer of 1952, he remarried, this time to Billie Jean Jones, a Louisiana beauty queen. The wedding was a media event, staged at a municipal auditorium before thousands of ticketed fans. Though Hank genuinely seemed to care for her, his downward spiral accelerated. That December, he hired a college student named Charles Carr to drive him from Alabama to a New Year's Eve show in Canton, Ohio. Hank, suffering from back pain and drinking heavily, was also under the influence of morphine, chloral hydrate, and alcohol, a dangerous combination. On January 1, 1953, as their Cadillac rode through the night and snow blanketed the highways, Carr stopped to check on Hank, who had been unresponsive. In Oak Hill, West Virginia, Carr pulled over and realized that the singer was no longer breathing. He had died in the back seat of the car, somewhere along the winding Appalachian roads. The cause was ruled heart failure, brought on by years of physical deterioration and chemical abuse. He was just 29 years old. News of Hank Williams's death spread like wildfire. Fans were devastated. In Montgomery, Alabama, over 20,000 people attended his funeral. Women wept openly, and hardened men clutched their hats as his coffin was lowered. Music luminaries lined up to pay respects, but for many, Hank had never felt like a star. He had been one of them, broken, but brilliant. In the years following his death, Hank's songs continued to reach audiences. Your Cheatin' Heart was released posthumously and became one of his most enduring hits. Covers of his work sprang up in nearly every genre, from country and rock to pop and gospel. Musicians from Elvis Presley to Bob Dylan, from Johnny Cash to Keith Richards, all acknowledged his songwriting. They saw in his music something elemental, a voice that carried both defiance and fragility. His lyrics, often plain-spoken, held the weight of unspeakable truths. His son, Hank Williams, Jr., eventually stepped into the spotlight, carving his own path in the music industry while forever living in the shadow of his father's ghost. Their family name became synonymous with both brilliance and tragedy. Monuments were raised. Books, documentaries, and films attempted to unravel the mystery of a man who seemed destined to destroy himself, even as he created music that healed others. Hank Williams became more than a memory. He became a cautionary tale, a poetic figure, and a symbol of raw, unfiltered expression. Hank Williams lived a life haunted by physical agony, emotional upheaval, and personal missteps. But through it all, he sang. He wrote with clarity and courage, recording songs that still echo in roadhouses and concert halls decades later. He did not survive long enough to witness the long arc of his work. He never saw the country music boom, the halls of fame, or the sea of artists who would follow in his wake. But what he left behind was unmistakable: a collection of songs etched in sorrow and spun from honest reflection. In the quiet corners of America, where heartbreak still strums through cheap radios, Hank's voice can be heard, not as a ghost, but as a companion, a man whose own heart may have failed, but whose music remains breathlessly alive.